Welcome to the License to Lead podcast. I'm Patty Fay. This podcast is for physicians or anyone who thinks healthcare needs a transformation led by physicians. License to Lead means that physicians are charged with and must be in charge of guiding the vision and the culture of healthcare systems. Hello, everyone. Welcome to License to Lead episode number 26. We're putting a bow on our first season by circling back in this encore episode to the topic of myths and stereotypes about doctors. In light of the horrendous toll taken on physicians and others caring for victims of the pandemic, and in light of physicians' relentless work ethic and commitment to patients and staff, I wanted to point to the striking contrast between the performance of physicians and some of the stereotypes of physicians. These myths have a life within corporate healthcare. They're not so much an issue in the eyes of the public, but the idea of doctors being poor team players or having a suboptimal decision-making style is so much in the water that even some physician leaders and writers have accepted these stereotypes without examining them. These myths completely crumble when studied. When the behavior and traits of physicians are rigorously analyzed and compared to the general population or to non-physician managers, these truisms are clearly falsisms. In this excerpt, I talk about why it's critical that we clearly see the physician skill set, because our profession and careers of nurses and technicians and other staff and lives depend on transforming healthcare systems to cultures that are aligned around a deep commitment to patients. We're not going to get there if we don't do everything we can to fan the flames of physician leadership at every level. Okay, here we go with episode 26. What do we know about the personalities and predilections of these arrogant, money-hungry lone wolves and unherdable cats who are terrible at managing money, who are not team players, and who are incapable of running a business? So stereotypes pop up whenever there are differences among groups and a we versus them dynamic is set up. Oxytocin mediates both our affiliation for our tribe and the satisfaction we humans feel when we vilify the other. It's all harmless if it's a North Dakotan telling a joke about Montanans, or if it's Coloradans, at least the few who didn't actually come from the West Coast, denigrating Californians. Doctors laugh at stereotypes about different physician specialists. And I'm here to say, the ones about psychiatrists are totally true, but the ones about internists are just vicious. So the jokes can be idle banter, no big deal. But as we all know, stereotypes can harm and can be used to limit people or to justify bad behavior. An example is if a physician stereotype is used to justify a leader's failings. For instance, a conflict-averse executive might express disgust at bad behavior by physicians, but then take themselves off the hook to take action, to have those courageous conversations because, as everyone knows, physicians are arrogant lone wolves. And so, heck, there's nothing you can do. Stereotypes can promote a personal agenda. For instance, a consultant might aim to sell you a compensation program to help incentivize your docs, who are, after all, just in it for the money. Two of my biggest beefs with physician stereotypes: number one, when high-profile physician leaders repeat them and use them as sound bites, and number two, when consultants or somebody pitching something runs these stereotypes up the flagpole to help sell their products. So let's talk about often repeated myths or stereotypes about doctors. And let's start with stereotype number one, the lone wolf physician who just cannot get along on a team. Some high-profile physician leaders are guilty of perpetuating this stereotype. I collect examples of people who describe doctors as not being team players or lone wolves or cowboys, and I have a whole file folder full of articles with such quotes by Dr. James Stoller, a highly credentialed pulmonologist at the Cleveland Clinic who heads up their education institute. He refers to physicians as heroic lone healers or cowboys, whose medical training, and I quote, conspire against physicians having reflexes for collaboration or followership, close quote. Dr. Stoller, a prolific publisher, packages and repackages his articles in one journal after another, and the same few lines are repeated, endless fractals, each replicating the irresistible phrases heroic lone healer, cowboy, lack of team behavior, even extrapolated authority. And what might that be? Well, that's when we're used to being the boss and we feel entitled. So it extrapolates to stuff like aggressive driving or being mad about having to wait in the line at the grocery store. Honestly, I feel bad if Dr. Stoller is surrounded by such narcissists. But really, does this description pass the sniff test? Do physicians really see themselves as heroic lone healers? What is the non-collaborative, heroic lone healer pathway into medicine? How does that stereotypical personality thrive in medical school, which is replete with teams and teamwork, with study teams, cadaver lab teams, and medical care teams during the 3rd and 4th year of med school? Once into internship and residency, physicians have progressive responsibility on rounding teams and surgical teams and ICU teams and multidisciplinary teams. Students and interns and residents change and adapt to new people and new expectations every 4 to 6 weeks, year after year after year. And these are real teams with real patient care responsibilities, not a business school model of reading a case study and then working in a small team to figure out the right answer for next week's class. So is there something innate about docs not playing well with others? Let's look at the evidence. A 2016 study using the Temperament and Character Inventory compared a group of 169 U.S. residents in various specialties to the general population and determined that the residents were more cooperative and altruistic than the general population. Okay, fine. That's a small study. Here's a bigger study. A 2018 study in the BMJ evaluated over 2,300 board-certified physicians, 1,400 residents, and 1,300 medical students from around the world using the 5-factor model assessment called the 10-item personality inventory. All 3 groups, the board-certified docs, residents, and the medical students, had the same profile compared to the general population. So the authors concluded that there is a consistent physician personality. And what were those results? The physicians and trainees scored higher on conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness, and lower on neuroticism, and there was no difference in openness to experience. So, based on this evidence, we'd want to replace our arrogant lone wolf description with maybe a Siberian Husky model. Dutiful, smart, works great in a team, good leader, and good follower. I think we should choose and publish interpretations that have some basis in evidence. The American Kennel Club characterizes the Siberian Husky as the friendly hero. Now there's a description I could endorse. A second stereotype is that physicians have a command and control decision-making style. This is a great example of a fascinating fact, which is that some of these dings against doctors are actually outcomes of business school education, according to the professors who work in the business schools. Listen for those details in podcast number 3. Anyway, Dr. Stoller, an NEJM Catalyst article, told an interviewer that our clinical training creates a reflex that works against physicians and our decision-making style, that clinical decision-making trains us in the tyranny of the or rather than the genius of the and. This allegedly handicaps physicians in their ability to make the more ambiguous decisions needed on an organizational level. This makes for interesting reading, but do we have any evidence that when compared to the general population or to other professionals or to business school grads that physicians are actually handicapped in this way? I think physicians get ambiguity pounded into them. With each change of attending or team, new rules and new allegiances apply. And with each new discovery or guideline, heck, everything I knew yesterday is wrong. Time to regroup quickly. Another writer, anesthesiologist Edward Mariano, puts it this way. He believes our training positions doctors to be great leaders and decision makers. As he says, physicians must curate available evidence, weigh risks and benefits, share recommendations in life or death situations, and translate technical jargon into understandable language that allows others to participate in the decision-making. He said that as physicians work their way up, a key learning is that the best ideas can come from anyone. Dr. Mariano's interpretation resonates with me. It describes many of the physicians I know. A September 2019 article in Medical Economics, written by John Figueroa, MBA, and Christopher Krubert, MD, MBA, also applauds physician decision-making ability and their aptitude for organizational level nimbleness. No concern here about struggling with the tyranny of the or. These authors said, quote, "This nimbleness, earned from pressure to care for their patients, often on a shoestring budget, gives many physician CEOs the creativity and fortitude to deliver financial results and not skimp on quality, close quote. A recent article, it was in the January 2020 issue of Harvard Business Review, identifies elements of good judgment that lead to better decision-making. This article made me think physician training and experience, rather than handicapping us, cultivates us to be adept decision makers. Sir Andrew Leakerman points to characteristics like the following: careful listening with a certain skepticism that challenges the information, experience in the relevant field, detachment, and a willingness to question the solutions. Wow, those sound like traits doctors get criticized for. And here, those qualities are presented as some of the factors that can lead to good decision making. Stereotype number 3, physicians are lousy at managing their money. A June 2019 article titled, quote, "Reasons Why Doctors Can't Manage Money," close quote, attributes our fatal financial flaws to a number of things, like God complexes and splurging after years of deprivation. But thank goodness, the article does go on to reassure physician readers by saying just because doctors have a reputation for being bad with money doesn't mean that they're doomed to a life of debt, or worse, if they seek professional help, close quote. Yes, bingo. The article was on the Investopedia site and had multiple links to all the financial advisors who would help save us from inevitable ruin. So that's marketing. Can't blame them for exploiting a stereotype that seems tailor-made for financial advisors. More annoying is when physicians spout the same non-evidence-based stuff. In June of 2019, James Turner, MD, wrote an online article titled 4 Reasons Why Doctors Are Bad with Money. And there was a live link in its first sentence. I clicked on how bad doctors are with money. Rather than taking me to the data proving this point, the link took me to his website where he was advertising his book on physician finance. A 2015 Nielsen Global Consumer Insight study found that 75% of Americans who make $150,000 a year save money. So compare this to the 93% of physicians who save money, according to the 2019 Medscape report. Medscape provided a lot more detail about how physicians saved and invested, and then hammered home my point with this statement, quote, "Let's trash the belief that doctors can't manage money or invest wisely," close quote. Okay, on the flip side, interestingly, is stereotype number 4, the assertion that docs are greedy and that we are primarily motivated by money. Now, it seems unlikely to me that someone hell-bent on making as much money as possible, who also has enormous drive and academic prowess, and an ability to delay rewards until the cows come home, well, probably even longer than that, would choose a medical career. Okay, so did I lose you in that run-on sentence? Okay, would a greedy little monster smarty pants who could get into any school choose the delayed gratification of medical training, crippling medical school debt, and increasingly an employed model of compensation? Add to that an oath to serve the patients and society, and a work schedule that's harrowing. I don't know. Seems like those sharp cookies slavering for the almighty buck would have sized up the situation and realized that a relatively quick MBA or a degree in investment banking would be a lot more financially fruitful. And here's a nice juxtaposition of data for you to consider now that we're pondering whether physicians are overly financially motivated. A June 2019 Forbes article looked at the highest CEO compensation of not-for-profit systems in the United States, and they named the 6 highest paid CEOs in not-for-profit hospital systems. These 6 highest paid CEOs each made at least $10 million in 2017. Juxtapose that group to the highest performing healthcare organizations, or the best hospitals, as listed by U.S. News and World Reports for 2018-19. The top 5 on that list were Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, Mass General in Boston, and the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. And guess what? There's no overlap between those two groups. So not one of these CEOs with a supersized salary was in charge of a top 5 best hospital. And none of these super salaried CEOs were physician CEOs. And how about the CEOs of the top 5 best hospitals? Well, glad you asked. They were all physician CEOs. Stereotype number 5. This is the one about physicians not being suited to lead or not capable of running a business. Here's one that really doesn't resonate with me personally. In my first podcast, I talked about that superb doc who I had helped recruit and who ended up being one of the first physicians to exercise his option and jump ship when the culture got nasty and punitive. He left and started a successful and innovative organization. 20 years later, it is still physician-led and has won multiple Best Place to Work awards. My husband, a neurologist, is the founder of a 6-physician intraoperative monitoring company with simply outstanding neurologists, a terrific reputation, providing intraoperative monitoring services in 10 states. 2 of his neurologist colleagues were clear that they would only work in a physician-run organization. In my coaching practice, I work with 3 physician leaders who are among the 3 most capable leaders I've ever met of any background. They're all quick studies, lovely human beings, and accomplished in operations, strategy, budget and finance, growth, report generation, navigating politics, public speaking. And I realize my examples are just anecdotes, but I am saving the data for part 3 of this podcast. I suppose stereotypes are inevitable in complex organizations, especially when there are lots of layers and silos. But again, for me, it is really painful when doctors repeat myths. Like this one. Dyke Drummond, who blogs as the Happy MD, and who is unbelievably prolific with a newsletter and a book, and he has a consulting and speaking career. One of his posts was Physician Leadership Skills, 3 reasons doctors make poor leaders and what you can do about it. Ouch. And when a reader posted a comment asking him what he thought of the HBR article, Why the Best Hospitals Are Managed by Doctors, he responded, because the best hospitals hire physician CEOs. So he didn't ascribe the excellent results to the physician leaders. He implied that the systems were good, so they chose to hire physician CEOs. But actually, the best of the best have always been physician-led, like Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic, numbers 1 and 2 on the U.S. News and World Report. They were founded by physicians, and they've been physician-led since their inception. It's hard to blame the Happy MD too much. These myths are in the water we swim in, right? But the evidence doesn't support such nonsense. I want to talk about, why does any of this matter? Why so touchy about these stereotypes? Aren't they just harmless labels? You know, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Wait, what? Words will never hurt me? I'll address that fallacy. I'll give you the real dirt on that ditty in my neuroscience episode. But here are reasons non-evidence-based physician stereotypes are a problem. Number 1, it makes the physician leadership role unattractive. Most of us want to step into roles that offer the promise of a high-performing team. If physician leaders are denigrated, why would anyone want to be a part of that? Number 2, leaders who believe these stereotypes create a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think people have to be closely monitored, or if you believe that all docs are arrogant, you create an environment where the people who fulfill those expectations, or the people who can tolerate those conditions, are the only ones who will stick around. And number 3, these stereotypes take leaders off the hook to listen and to be respectful of dissenting voices. If the executive team believes that physicians are arrogant and don't tolerate change, then when there's resistance to a dysfunctional EMR or poor attendance at a tone-deaf meeting to address burnout, the leaders can just shake their heads in disgust at the docs who won't, get on board. Number 4, it enables avoidance of 2 of the most important tasks of managing a culture. First, excellent selection, and second, courageous performance management. If a leader believes that physicians are inherently difficult to deal with, they're probably not going to screen out the jerks when they're recruiting. Then the double whammy ensues. The haphazard selection results in a toxic hire, and leaders then can dodge the difficult work when it's time to address that behavior. A conflict-averse leader can just say, hell, I'm not going to talk to her about her snarky attitude. She's not nearly as bad as the endocrinologist who punched a hole in the wall. And then guess what? Again, the very best docs and nurses jump ship because the best of the best have lots of options. And none of us, want to hang out with arrogant lone wolves who aren't team players. The 5th reason is when we accept physician stereotypes, we're not only shooting ourselves in the foot, but we're rejecting our own commitment to be evidence-based. And then finally, the 6th reason, is these dings against docs just don't jive with my personal experience. I know that's not the highest order of evidence, but I'm surrounded by physicians, and I find kindness, commitment, collaboration, and respectful behavior to be overrepresented among physicians. Think about your physician colleagues. Are terms like arrogant, non-collaborative, change-averse, bad with money over or underrepresented? And of course, by stressing over or underrepresented, it implies that you are considering some kind of comparison group. That's important. More on that in a bit. So, how about those stinkers, those high-profile physician leaders who use stereotypes for sound bites? A great, i.e. terrible, example is an HBR article by Thomas Lee and Toby Cosgrove titled Engaging Doctors in the Healthcare Revolution. So, Dr. Lee is a phenomenally accomplished physician leader and prolific author, and Dr. Cosgrove, a thoracic surgeon, was the longstanding CEO of Cleveland Clinic, a prolific author, a decorated Vietnam veteran. You get the picture. They're amazing. Well, the thrust of their article was how it was possible to use 4 specific motivational techniques to engage physicians in the healthcare revolution. I didn't like the title or the whole premise. I just knew I was going to run into something in there about needing to get the doctors on board. They described doctors as anxious, struggling, in denial, and mourning about change. They said unmasking performance data can be excruciating for physicians. I thought that was kind of embarrassing. They invoked carrots and sticks by saying physicians, like everyone else, are motivated by financial incentives. And they double down on that with a sidebar giving us the how-tos of creating incentives. I'll talk more about incentives in later podcasts, but incentives as a constructive engagement strategy should have died in 1993 when Elfie Cohen wrote Punished by Rewards. The authors go on to say physician engagement requires more than merely an agreement not to sabotage. I first read this article seated at my desk in my home office. When I got to the sentence about how physicians need to understand cooperation means more than just agreeing not to sabotage, I glanced around my office for my blood pressure cuff. I noticed my dog had cocked his head to one side and was studying me with some concern. Was I making some kind of guttural noises? I don't know, but I centered myself, labeled my emotion, and did a couple of deep, mindful breaths. I continued my reading, and along came the painful trope, quote, non-financial rewards and penalties also have a role to play in getting doctors on board, close quote, on board. Et tu, Brute? As I said, the main thrust of the article was how to use 4 specific motivational tools when trying to motivate doctors because, quote, physician engagement can no longer be about short-term maximization of fee-for-service revenue, close quote, ouch. Anyway, they had a nice chart with 4 healthcare systems that had been successful in engaging physicians in important projects. And the authors linked one of the 4 motivators to each of the 4 change initiatives at the various institutions. But what the authors didn't seem to notice, or at least didn't mention, was what I saw as the single most relevant factor to physician engagement. All 4 of these healthcare institutions that had been successful in engaging physicians were physician-led. Geisinger, University of Utah, Mayo, and the Cleveland Clinic all had physician CEOs. They missed that point. They missed what should have been the primary finding in the article. Why would high-profile, accomplished physicians repeat these stereotypes, whether in casual conversations or as sound bites? Well, I have a few theories. First, I don't think they've examined the statements. I don't think they asked themselves, does my medical training really conspire against me being a team player? Do physicians need incentives to do the right thing? Is my doctor's spouse a heroic lone healer or a cowboy? Number 2, some of the physicians are consultants and have programs to pitch or a blog or a book to promote. And the lone wolf cowboy with no emotional intelligence who can't manage money and won't get on board is clickbait. A third reason some high-profile, accomplished physicians might use these stereotypes is that some physicians will seek to disarm their audiences and reduce the power differential with a few little, aw shucks, doctor-deprecating comments. It endears them to their non-physician audience. It's kind of like saying, yeah, this brain surgery stuff, it ain't exactly rocket science. And a fourth reason, and I think this is a real minority, but some physicians have failed to get any traction in their ambitions for leadership. They haven't earned leadership credibility from their physician colleagues, and they don't get the promotions that they think they deserve. They're susceptible to becoming a shill for a non-physician CEO, but this is a subset that might repeat stereotypes because they believe them. They don't believe they've been treated fairly. A final reason, and I think an important reason, is my theory that tacit knowledge plays a role in why high-profile physician leaders repeat stereotypes. These highly accomplished physician leaders are asked about their success in becoming a physician CEO or in dealing with physicians, or they're asked to write an article about why physicians in some organizations are willing to engage in the healthcare revolution, but they can't articulate it. They don't point to all the tacit knowledge they've amassed, informing their expert judgment and their ability to marshal the energy of their physicians, because they're not even aware that that's what's going on. So when sound bites are needed, they fish around in the readily available bucket of tropes about doctors. I must have addressed the physician's inherent lack of teamwork, or I must have applied just the right motivational technique. Jeffrey Pfeffer described a Stanford colleague of his who was frequently asked to give talks about how he managed a successful multidisciplinary center. He told Pfeffer that once, right in the middle of his talk, he thought to himself, if we actually managed the center that way, it would be a disaster. These physicians I've called out for perpetuating stereotypes all have wheelbarrows full of credentials and accomplishments. They don't need my opinions or my approval. Nonetheless, how I'd love to add something to their New Year's resolutions. And here it is. Evaluate whether some of the labels assigned to doctors are accurate. And when characterizing physicians, if you're building on a negative stereotype, use evidence. All right, that's a wrap on the subject of physician myths and stereotypes. And with that, we've put a bow on season 1 of the License to Lead podcast. I hope you join me in 2 weeks as we open our second season with a plunge into the netherworld of pharmacy benefits managers. Former AMA president and warrior on behalf of patients, Dr. Barbara McEnany is my powerful guide into the depths of darkness and avarice. Thank you for listening. And as always, thank you for all of your care and caring.
Thanks for listening to the License to Lead podcast. Be sure to visit licensed2leadpodcast.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and sign up for our newsletter. Leave us a message with your provocative question or your thoughtful comments. You might inspire a future episode of the License to Lead podcast. Thanks so much, everyone.